This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our preview of the second Eastern Conference semifinal matchup between the top-seeded team, Milwaukee Bucks. They will take on the fifth-seeded Miami Heat, and much is ado about these two teams. One heavily favored, but another one who surprisingly has opened up a lot of eyes. And I think begs to question, how difficult a run will this be for the Milwaukee Bucks? Can the Miami Heat conjure up enough to be able to match the offensive potency and all-around talent that this Milwaukee Bucks team has to offer? So many interesting questions that have arisen.
You don't need to understand how pre-collision cameras detect pedestrians in low light. You don't need to understand any of the craft that went into the Lexus ES to feel it. With outstanding connectivity and standard Lexus Safety System Plus 2.0, experience amazing at your Lexus dealer. Click the banner to discover more.
LSS Plus 2.0 and the pre-collision system with pedestrian detection are not a substitute for safe and attentive driving practice. See owner's manual for additional limitations and details.
On the validity of the Miami Heat team being a serious contender, and we're going to break it all down. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, my partner in crime, as we do our time here discussing this really underrated yet will be highly anticipated preview between the Bucks and the Miami Heat. What's good, brother?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, it's excited that we're finally into the second round here. Things have dragged on, and for the right reasons.
For the right
obviously
reasons,
in the
exactly.
NBA for
Yes.
sure. But
yes,
but I'm in Milwaukee in a much anticipated second round matchup that has some Bucks faithful a little bit uneasy about this one because Miami's handled them pretty well throughout the course of the regular season.
Absolutely, and I think the other reason is that what we've so far seen from the Milwaukee Bucks is a very inconsistent basketball team that hasn't really much reflected, isn't really much of a reflection of the team that we saw just outright dominate the Eastern Conference really for the first half of the NBA season. Now on the back end, and I think you can even lend to this, Shaw, I think the turning point was that there's a stretch of games that the Milwaukee Bucks had. I think it was a West Coast stretch where they played Western Conference teams like the Clippers, like the Lakers. I think they even took on the Houston Rockets, and they didn't look like a team that we wanted to just seriously push in the conversation of saying whoever comes out of the Western Conference shouldn't just overlook the Milwaukee Bucks like they're just going to walk through them should they get to the finals. I think if nothing else, that stretch, that road trip that the Bucks were on kind of made us take a step back. And while we felt like, yes, Giannis is the man, much deservedly is expected to be an MVP candidate. He just recently won Defensive Player of the Year. There are still holes in this team that have yet to be completely answered with confidence. And if our expectation is that this is the team that's supposed to walk out of the Eastern Conference, they have not answered those questions emphatically. And against a team like the Miami Heat, Shaw, I think we may even be raising more questions about how legit the Milwaukee Bucks are, how stacked they are, and if they are capable of making this run.
Milwaukee's in a very unique situation only because they rely and are relying even more so on Giannis throughout the course of the playoffs here. They're just like, listen, we're in trouble, throw it to him. Maybe he'll draw some fouls and get into the paint. Milwaukee, one of the top teams in the league in terms of points in the paint. And that's because Giannis is scoring the most points in the paint since the Shaquille O'Neal days in terms of what he's getting to accumulate his stats on a regular basis. And I think Miami is going to have to institute a pretty unique defensive scheme to kind of keep him out of there a little bit. And I don't think it's going to be any one man's job to do that. But the rest of this Bucks team, that's where they have to step up. Sure, they can shoot the three. They shoot it from with a decent percentage and rely on that to initiate offense, especially to create lanes for Giannis to operate. But if Middleton and Bledsoe and even the Wes Matthews of the world and Connaughton and those guys aren't hitting shots on a regular basis, that's going to be a huge problem for Milwaukee. And Miami's found a way to, well, like I said, they've played them tough throughout the course of this regular season. So a guy like Bam Adebayo is probably going to spend a lot of time on Giannis and trying to maybe defend him one-on-one. But if they're able to send some help there, and whether that's Jimmy sagging off of his man or whether that's Tyler Hero or Duncan Robinson, something like that, sagging off of their man to give Bam some help in there, the Milwaukee Bucks shooters need to be ready to either shoot that three or drive to continue to keep the Miami defense rotating.
Well, and I think this is part of the reason why, Shaw, that we said that the presence of Chris Middleton in the first series against the Orlando Magic, I think, was critical. Chris Middleton needs to be present in this upcoming series. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that aspect. I don't know if we're going to throw out him being an X factor or anything like that. But given what we saw last year in the fact that he struggled so mightily to be able to shoot the ball with consistency, to be able to be an effective second-tier player or maybe a 1B player to Giannis, to me, I think now becomes even more evident when you're playing against the Miami Heat team. Now, I will say this, and again, there's a litany of things that we're going to kind of rifle through when we're talking about this preview. There is definitely something that has to be said for Milwaukee's ability to be confident to shoot the basketball and to be able to go on runs. Because if we know the Miami Heat, they are one of the few teams that we have seen that can utilize their physicality to play defense to help initiate counter runs against some of the better teams that know how to go on runs. And we have seen at times when the Miami Heat have been so ineffective to that they wind up just basically, giving the game away. Like they just, have completely tuned themselves out and are already thinking about maybe the next game forward. But if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, you have to be cognizant that all of your shooters have to be ready to go. This to me is one of the caveats in us questioning the confidence of the Bucks being able to get through this series. It's not a question of them not being more talented than the Miami Heat. I think it's a question of the confidence that they're coming into this particular series, because Eric Spoelstra will have these guys as geared up as necessary for the task of playing against the Milwaukee Bucks. And essentially, the pressure is on Milwaukee, but it's a different kind of pressure. It's not about whether or not they're capable of beating them. It's about them playing to the level that they are capable of playing and be able to sustain that throughout the course of a series. And we have seen them go through those peaks and valleys more often than not, even in the series against the Orlando Magic. Too many times in that series, they have upped double-digit leads, as much as 20, 24, 25 points, and then have allowed a team like the Orlando Magic, who offensively struggle on their own right, to come back into these games. And that, to me, doesn't bode well against better teams that if they do go on these type of runs, do the Milwaukee have a switch for them to flip on to suddenly then take care of business when it's necessary? I think it's going to be much harder with the Heat.
I don't disagree. I think Orlando was a team that Milwaukee should have been tuning up, their team and tuning up their offense and their defense and gearing up for the second round. And yeah, they won that series and, had some big leads throughout it, but they didn't look great. They didn't look like a championship level team. So I feel like they're still trying to more or less play themselves into championship level form. And you don't necessarily want to be trying to tune up against the Miami Heat, a team that is obviously very well coached, is going to play good defense, especially in stretches, and can also shoot the three ball if almost as better than even you can. I think that's something Milwaukee's got to be very, very cognizant of throughout the course of this series. Brook Lopez is a guy who's also going to have an opportunity. He may be the guy Miami's kind of like, all right, well, Brook Lopez beats us, cool, and if he can get out there and get you, 15 to 16, 17 points, and hit a couple of threes per game, then Milwaukee's going to be in a lot more business than I think maybe we're even giving them credit for right now. But I agree 100% where they haven't looked like themselves. They have a tendency to let their foots off the gas, start turning the ball over, start missing a lot of their threes, and then just saying, okay, Giannis, bail us out. And that can be very tiring for a guy like that. Yes, he's Defensive Player of the Year. Yes, he's probably going to win MVP and all of those things. But you don't, at this stage, as a championship level team, you shouldn't have to just say, all right, just do it and do it for, the entire fourth quarter or whatever it is. You need to make sure guys are able to step up and hit some big shots. And that's where, again, your guys like Middleton and Lopez and those guys are going to get those opportunities, and they have to make sure they capitalize.
Well, and I think one of the other things as well, too, is Brook Lopez needs to punish the Miami Heat for having a small lineup, okay? I know that, you have Bam Adebayo, you have Kelly Olynyk, and maybe in the sense of girth, those guys can, match up and kind of sustain a level of physicality in some regards when Giannis is going full steam, into the paint. But if you're Brook Lopez, you need to punish the Miami Heat for having a small front court and help supplement the way that Giannis is going to help punish the Miami Heat for having a front court. So I think it's coming in two dynamics, in two folds, because I appreciate the fact that you mentioned the Lopez brothers, and you mentioned the fact that Lopez, who is very much an intricate part to the Milwaukee Bucks' presence as a front court based team. He is very important to them. Probably more important in this series than I think Chris Middleton, who I think, again, we go back to the fact that if Chris Middleton is shooting shots with confidence, I think it instills confidence in George Hill. I think it instills confidence in Eric Bledsoe. But from a front court perspective, if there is going to be calls made in favor of the Milwaukee Bucks in the course of this series, it is not just from what Giannis is doing, getting the superstar treatment. It's also ultimately a measurement of what happens when Lopez is getting those calls. This is why I think it's so important that if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, you have a plethora of talent on your roster. You have so many ways that you can go about doing this. And it's going to be incumbent upon Budenholzer for him to be able to implement the right strategy when necessary through courses of the game, because Spoelstra will change things up as well too. And you have to punish them. Just when you look at it, it's just vanilla. I got a bigger guy down there. That guy needs to force them to hack. They need to force them to foul and get my bigs on the free throw line and get those cheap points. I mean, we say this all the time, and I think it just doesn't get emphasized enough when we talk about a team like the Milwaukee Bucks. You didn't put this roster together only to not implement or use these guys when it matters the most. And this is the type of series where you can really gauge and see how versatile your lineup truly is if you're going to allow them to go and do what their size and their talent on paper reflects.
Yeah, I think Milwaukee is going to really try to utilize everybody, and I think even more so on the defensive side. I'm interested to see the kind of cross matches. Like, we know Miami's going to throw different guys at Giannis, so Crowder may start on him. Adebayo will take some time, as I alluded to earlier. Jimmy Butler may see a little bit of time on as well, but I'm interested to see what Milwaukee does to try to disrupt Miami's offense, and especially a lot with their driving kick game out to three. Milwaukee's defenders are good, right? When you think about Middleton and Wes Matthews and guys like that, even Giannis, they're good. But they're not used to, in some ways, having to, chase guys around in the way that Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson kind of just continuously move without the basketball. And that's going to be an extra added, I think, pressure for the Milwaukee Bucks on the perimeter side defensively. Does Wes Matthews maybe try to crowd Dragic, was immense in that first series against the Pacers? So then does that put Middleton on Jimmy Butler? And then Giannis with the opportunity to guard Bam, or to kind of maybe roam a little bit, and try to play help defense on everything else. Those are things that I'm interested to see what Coach Bud really, really tries to do, because you have to stay attached to Herro. You have to stay attached to Duncan Robinson. And by doing that alone, that's going to wear you out on the other side, where you also have to try to contribute. So the depth of Milwaukee's lineup is going to be extremely, extremely important. So Connaughton coming off the bench, even Marvin Williams is obviously not a perimeter defender, but even his ability to be out there to try to maybe give you some tough rebounds here in the 12 to 15 minutes he may get, and also be able to space the floor as well too, especially if Miami's going small as well. Those are things that I think Bud has got to ensure that his bench and his roster is ready to go. And listen, they're still the favorites in this. We're talking very heavily like, they're in peril and they're in trouble. And that's only because they haven't looked good. Miami looked amazing against an ill-equipped Indiana team, obviously, who was still hobbled and missing some of their main key points there. But it's also about what Spoelstra's been able to extract out of this roster and this team thus far. And again, it's giving a lot of people reason for pause to look at this series. And you're going to see a lot of people picking Miami to win this simply because of the three-point shooting and Jimmy Butler and his ability to try to drag his team to the finish line.
Well, a couple of things, and you bring up some really excellent points. A couple of matchups that I do think is going to be very interesting is how are you going to flex Andre Iguodala, who I think is going to be very critical for the Miami Heat. I would not be surprised if in many instances Andre Iguodala is going to be tasked with the responsibility of kind of being a floating defender for the second unit. And more so in the sense that if you have Giannis out there, he's going to probably have to take, the responsibility of holding up Giannis a couple of times for some stretch minutes and things. It's going to be interesting because you have a guy like Jay Crowder, who I think has lost a step in his ability to keep with some of the more athletic defenders, on opposing teams. But his physicality can at least keep him, in the running, so to speak. Then when he gets in foul trouble, you really begin to realize how thin of a lineup that the Miami Heat really have in their front court. And that's why, you got to stretch and use guys like Iguodala and so forth and so on. I think not having Myers Leonard, to me, is going to be very critical in the series. And so it's just going to be interesting to see how Spoelstra is going to be able to, on his part, from a defensive perspective, be able to figure out ways to at least give his team a chance, because you can make the argument that the Miami Heat have the advantage from a backcourt perspective, right? Jimmy Butler, Duncan Robinson, Goran Dragic, they didn't even play Kendrick Nunn in that first series. And so if you're Spoelstra, you cannot get away with not doing that. I think he's going to be so critical in this game, in this series, against the Milwaukee Bucks, to give themselves even a puncher's chance to be able to contend with what you need to do offensively to be able to match what the Milwaukee Bucks do. I think that there are going to be stretches where even if the Miami Heat rely on Butler's ability to play two ways and defend, there are too many bodies that the Milwaukee Bucks can throw from an offensive perspective that Spoelstra can't afford to just throw him all around, which is the reason why I go back to my original point about how they're going to use Andre Iguodala defensively as a floater to be able to help offset a lot of the responsibilities I think Jimmy Butler is going to have from a defensive side of the basketball, because this is not going to be a question about whether or not the Miami Heat offensively is going to be able to keep up with the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't see that as being the case, but there's going to have to be some critical stops being made, and part of that is going to be who is going to help Jimmy Butler get to that place. It's either going to be through carelessness of the Milwaukee Bucks not playing their brand of basketball, or it's going to be somebody has to step up defensively to help offset some of the bodies that Budenholzer is going to be throwing out there outside of Giannis Antetokounmpo. That could be your point. Matchup issues, cross matchup issues that the Miami Heat probably will not be able to sustain through a 7-game series.
I mean, this is the whole reason they got Iguodala and Crowder anyway, right? Like to be in a matchup against a team like Milwaukee or potentially even Boston, who has a lot of winged players who you need to go out there and try to defend. And this is what they were brought here to try to do. So this is, that really true, that first test, against a guy like Giannis, who's going to be trying to drive and get to the rim, kind of ad nauseum. Can you keep him in front of you and keep him out of the lane in general? Kendrick Nunn got some spot minutes towards the end of that series, in Indiana, and he played well, in that time. He's been somebody who they've relied on to continue to give them offense. His ability or inability really to play make and create is just, I think, is something that makes him somewhat of a liability right now. I mean, he's not, again, he's a rookie, so it's, there's obviously room to grow there. But I think Milwaukee can kind of pick on that, especially when he's out there. If he's coming off the bench again, assumingly, and Dragic is starting. You double team, not maybe double team him, but again, you fake the double team at Nunn and make him a little bit nervous and see if you get him to turn the ball over a little bit. Miami had some real problems this year with keeping the ball safe at times. And I think that's where Milwaukee needs to make sure that they utilize their length to try to disrupt things, and then that's where they can get out and get on the break, and get those fast break points, points off for turnovers. So I think it's going to be, very interesting, as we allude to. We keep talking about the defensive matchups here. And I think that's where Milwaukee has a slight edge, where they feel like they should be able to guard more guys than Miami could potentially guard them on the other side. But that hasn't been the case, as I've said, throughout the course of the regular season, only because, again, Miami's been so good at hunting down, mismatches and driving and kicking and finding 3-point shots out there. So the Bucks are really, 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 really going to have to do a good job of staying attached. But if they can do that, which I think they can, they can force some turnovers and make this series a little bit more easier for them, and not have to go against Miami's set defense.
Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, as we are giving you our preview of the Eastern Conference semifinal matchup between the Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat. Interesting to say, Shaw, that in the way that you're kind of bringing this up, I guess it kind of leads into what I was going to talk about here is when you talk about the Miami Heat, they are the 5th best team since in the playoffs right now of the 16 teams participating as far as assists per game. The Milwaukee Bucks being the 2nd. And I think part of that is within regards to trust. Clearly, the emergence of Goran Dragic, and I don't know if anybody expected to see this kind of productivity from Goran as far as what he showed us in this first round of the series. Again, yes, what are we talking about when we're saying it was the Indiana Pacers? But listen, the Pacers were a good basketball team. And yes, they didn't have all of their players, but that doesn't take away from what the Miami Heat were able to do in order to knock out the Pacers in 5 games, right? And so to me, what this says is there's a level of trust that is definitely there as far as the backcourt goes. And that to me is something that I think wasn't accounted for when we're talking about how dangerous the Miami Heat team can really be from an offensive perspective. Because we've often said that most times when we talk about the Miami Heat, it's never so much how great they are offensively, but what their defense enables their offense to do. In this situation, in this circumstance, we can see that these can have they can be two parallel discussions about the fact that the Miami Heat, when playing in matchups, depending, they can be a team that can score basket for basket against some of these other teams. When you're talking about the fact that they play good defense, it supplements the fact of what they want to do offensively. So the fact that they are getting buckets because they're moving the basketball around, to me, is a good sign for the Miami Heat in their ability to stay with the Milwaukee Bucks. Because if they exclusively have to rely on their defense in order to create a lot of their offense, then we're just basically saying that the Milwaukee Bucks have to give the games away for them to have a chance to win.
Yeah, I think the Dragic that they got in this so far in the playoffs is maybe that's why Spoelstra was saving him for the entire regular season, right? Bringing him off the bench is just kind of like, all right, whatever, be the 6th man and you play that role. And Dragic never complained. Then boom, the playoff starts. All right, veteran, go back in here and and do what you do. And he played great in the Indiana series. And I think this is where a guy like Bledsoe and, as I alluded to, even Wesley Matthews, they're gonna have to figure out ways to stay in front of them and disrupt that offense. The good thing about Miami, though, from that and kind of almost to what you're saying is, yeah, their shooters don't do a whole lot of creating in terms of Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, and the like, even Jay Crowder when he's out there. But that's where a guy like Bam Adebayo was massive. He does get 5-6 assists a game, and Jimmy Butler can create for you as well too. So even if you stop Dragic, they're gonna start running offense through Butler and Adebayo and looking for those shooters out there on the wings. And again, I think Milwaukee has enough, to make sure. But I think the biggest part of this really for me is the Milwaukee bench. There's a drop off there. Miami's is pretty comfortable with anybody on their team getting shots, especially even in that second lineup. I'm not quite as confident in Milwaukee's, confidence even in that for their second unit. Do they want Connaughton taking a bunch of shots? Do they want Marvin Williams taking a bunch of shots? Guys like that, who are going to have to play some minutes for them. And I think that's where the biggest difference for me is going to be. Milwaukee starters may see a lot more time than Miami starters, and then it's going to be about who can stay fresh towards the end, especially as Giannis hunts to try to get into the lane. And if he's tired and has had a long game trying to defend or has been beat up physically, then those things are gonna wear on him. And the free throw shooting is going to be a huge part of this series as well. And the coaching adjustments that Spoelstra and Coach Bud both make equally. But those are things I'm looking at, man. Like, I really and truly, I think this is going to be an entertaining series. I don't know how high scoring it's going to be because I think these teams are going to try to lock in defensively and kind of cut off the getting to the basket and the 3-point shooting that is that is happening on both teams' behalves.
Hey, and I just want to make one correction. I mistakenly had said that the Miami Heat took out the Pacers in 5. That's incorrect on my part. They actually swept them. So I want to make sure I correct myself before we get knee deep into the weeds of the rest of our preview between these two teams, and make sure that the Miami Heat get their just due. They got the brooms and they respectfully swept the Pacers right into the trash bin. So with that being said, I think you bring up an excellent point about the benches. And here's something that's interesting, Shaw, because this to me, I think, lends a lot more into what has Mike Budenholzer learned so far in his stint as being the head coach as for the Milwaukee Bucks and their runs that they are making, to get into the playoffs. Sometimes you can say, hey, you can never have enough of a good thing. And I mean, when you look at their roster, they have DiVincenzo, they have Hill, they have Matthews, they have Connaughton, Middleton in some respects kind of, plays, a guard, has guard duties, with the second unit from time to time when Giannis comes off the floor. Kyle Korver, right? Shooting forward, but at times can play more off of kind of like a two guard, shooting guard type thing in certain sets that they run, right? To me, I think it's critical on how Budenholzer is going to, deploy his guards in challenging the Miami Heat defensively. At times I've seen where I think the wrong combination has been out there on the court, that has nullified some of the runs that they're capable of going on. When they pull certain personnel out and replace them, he tends to leave certain groups in there too long. And we saw this in the series against the Orlando Magic. It's one thing when a team comes back from a 25 point deficit, in one game. It's another thing when you just start seeing this as a trend, right? And that's what it was in the course of that first series. It was a trend. And I think a lot of that is dependent upon how long are you leaning on the personnel that you're putting out there on the floor to nullify runs or to stop runs or to get on runs. And I think Budenholzer has to be very careful in how long he leans on certain guys and certain groups to be effective in whatever they're implementing as their game plan. Because I think, to your point, Shaw, if you leave guys out there too long and allow the Miami Heat to go and generate runs off of Milwaukee turnovers and carelessness and ineffective at shooting the basketball, then you go right back into that whole scenario that we just talked about in the beginning of this show, where you're saying they leaned way too much on Giannis to bail him out. And I don't think that should be a habit that you're practicing, even if we're not talking about the Bucks getting to the finals, let alone the conference finals. We're just talking about the well-being of Giannis Antetokounmpo and leaning on him to be the guy. We know he's the guy, but this is not the way that you want to validate him being the guy, is by saying you got to bail me out every single time I make poor decisions or don't put the right personnel on the floor to continue to execute the game plan to advance us further.
Yeah, I like that point. And I think even looking at their playoff minutes, you're seeing, Giannis and Chris Middleton around 31 minutes a game and things of that nature. And that's great to keep them fresh. And, probably could have been more had, and it would have been more had it been closer, I think, in certain aspects. But as you alluded to, they blow leads and they have to put those guys back out there. That's just not great, and not a great sign for a championship level contending team. I think you'll see those minutes creep up into the 35-ish range, maybe even 36.
Absolutely.
Especially with
he's going to force
Miami
that.
Being, yeah. I think if Miami's going to be extremely competitive throughout, but then that's where it boils down to, is like, can those guys, the others, as you alluded to, can they be efficient in whatever minutes they get, and then also not be a liability defensively? Korver was decent for them in 15 minutes and basically in that first series, giving them almost 2 threes a game in that series. So great. Does he come and give you a quick 6 points, and it's a boost, and then he can get out, before he becomes a defensive liability. The same thing for DiVincenzo. I think DiVincenzo and Connaughton, they're going to have the inevitable task of trying to chase some of those other shooters around, and then make guys work. And I think for Bud, it's just really about what is he able to establish offensively outside of Giannis. Like we know Giannis is going to be great. He's going to 30, 40 even points a game or whatever the case may be. But can everybody be on the same page to pick their proverbial spots and help when he's going to need them the most, so that he's not just carrying the load 100%. And I'm concerned, and I think everybody is concerned, that Milwaukee has not looked the way that we would like them to. But I still feel like they are the superior team. They just got to have to go ahead and prove it. And Milwaukee's going to and Miami's going to make sure that they do.
All right, Shaw. So with all that being said, and we went through a whole lot of what Milwaukee is capable of and what they need to be fearful of when they're playing the Miami Heat. To me, I am curious, though, who to you really needs to step up big for the Miami Heat to have any opportunity or chance to be able to win this series?
It's a combination of guys, really, because I think Butler's going to be fine. I feel like Dragic is going to be fine, but it's these young guys who aren't tested. I think Bam's going to be fine too. And maybe he's not as tested as as obviously Jimmy Butler, but it's going to be the shooters. It's going to be Harrell. It's going to be Duncan Robinson. It's going to be Kendrick Nunn. Can that trio of guys come out here and really produce and answer the call to the bell of something that is next level for them? Like they believe that they have an opportunity to go to the Eastern Conference Finals and maybe even the NBA Finals. Like they feel like they have more than a puncher's chance. But those guys, that trio specifically of untested and unproven dudes, need to all of a sudden grow up and be guys who make Milwaukee guard on a regular basis. And I think they have the ability to do that. But I think, to me, that's what it boils down to. Miami's three-point shooting cannot fail them in this series. Otherwise, it's not going to go the way that many people are thinking.
I'm going to go in a different direction. I think if we're talking about having an opportunity or a chance to win this series, I think this is going to come down to the play of Jay Crowder. And I think it's a combination of Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala. When we talked about this a little bit earlier, their ability to be on the court and to be able to defend and kind of apply the physicality that I think the Milwaukee Bucks have not quite been tested, so to speak, I think is going to be critical.
Yeah, I don't disagree in terms of the importance of those guys. As we alluded to, we just said this series is one of the main reasons those guys were brought here, right? So that's definitely spot on in terms of their importance. I think it's more so on the defensive side, but you're right. If you get those sneaky points, a couple threes here and there.
And we've seen Iguodala do it in playoffs, right? He's been clutch in the playoffs offensively more so than defensively from time to time.
Yeah, and then he'll do that signature crazy shrug. Oh, I didn't know. I hate that, but what he does, or whatever, he'll tuck his hands behind his back and run down or whatever. I think Miami's in a very, very good space here. But the one question I'll have outside of that too is Milwaukee.
I will say this though, real quick, Shaw. I will say this: Iguodala don't want to be that dude though that Giannis pins his layup off the backboard like LeBron did. Okay, so he needs to be careful with those mannerisms that he be throwing out there, man. He don't want to be caught a second time in the playoffs being a poster child for the ascension of greatness for another one.
For sure. And I think Milwaukee, where they have a slight advantage, is that I think I trust maybe their play creation a little bit more than Miami's. While I think Miami does have three guys in Dragic, Butler, and Adebayo who can definitely do it. I think Middleton's ability to pass the ball, obviously Giannis's ability to pass the ball and used to being double and maybe even sometimes triple team, and even Eric Bledsoe with his driving kick, if he can get by Dragic or Butler, whoever's defending him, and get into the lane and cause some havoc, that gives Milwaukee all the opportunities they need to make sure they can get some open looks from the 3-point line as well too. But in general, I feel like it's interesting because we've talked so much about this series and really haven't talked much about Jimmy Butler's actual role in this series and what he's going to do. We've talked a lot about what the others, but Butler is not an X factor. I mean, he's a factor, obviously, and Miami needs him to play well on both sides of the basketball. But he has a tendency at sometimes to really let the offense come to him, and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't know that this is a series in which that can be the case. I think he's going to have to be super aggressive and trying to make sure that the Milwaukee defenders are working to guard him as equally as he's going to be guarding them on the other side.
And I'll add this point as well too. Jimmy Butler needs to punish Chris Middleton. Chris Middleton Chris Middleton is in an interesting space, right? Like, he's somebody that we're looking for as being the offensive sidekick to Giannis Antetokounmpo and be doing it consistently, right? Like we talk about CJ McCollum next to Damian Lillard, Russell Westbrook next to James Harden. That's what we're trying to equate with Chris Middleton's offensive capabilities. But the one thing that I will say that Chris Middleton is, he'll never cheat you defensively. But if you're Jimmy Butler, part of the reason why I think you want to give yourself a chance in this series is Jimmy Butler has to punish Chris Middleton. Jimmy Butler has to force Chris Middleton to choose whether or not if he's going to be capable of contributing offensively or be able to contribute defensively. And so if you get him thinking in that kind of context, he could wind up throwing himself off. And I mean, that's what great players do that, right? It's just the way of things, okay? Especially in a series like this. So I think it's incumbent upon Jimmy Butler, yes, to be Jimmy Butler, to be that guy, offensively. But I think in part of him being that guy offensively, it's punishing Chris Middleton for having to defend Jimmy Butler and forcing Chris Middleton to maybe even do more offensively that he's incapable of being able to do defensively from time to time. Force Budenholzer to probably have to put somebody else on Jimmy Butler if Chris Middleton gets into early foul trouble or is incapable of staying in front of Jimmy Butler. And to me, that is where Jimmy Butler to me thrives and shines. It's not just his grittiness, and we give him praise for the fact that he never backs down. He has a veteran-like attitude when he goes out there and he competes and everything. It's also the headiness of how he plays his game. And to me, that could be a problem in that kind of matchup with Chris Middleton if Middleton is all up in his feels about thinking about how to defend Butler, and the same side of his ineffectiveness of not being able to offensively punish Jimmy Butler for defending him as well too.
Yeah, and I think that makes some sense. The good thing about both of them is that if their offense isn't going, that they're still going to try to play defense.
Yes,
Butler
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Butler more so than Middleton for sure. But I think even in that aspect, Middleton will then figure out ways. All right, well, can I drive or can I post, and then figure out ways to hit cutters. Like I think Middleton might be slightly a better playmaker than Butler is at this stage, but that might just be a result of kind of the offenses that are ran. Butler still is very good at play creation and getting his guys involved as well too. So I think if either one of them are struggling offensively, you won't see them be complete liabilities out there. But it will be interesting. It will be interesting to see, because I think in some ways, really and truly, Milwaukee needs Middleton's offense more than Miami needs Butler's offense, but I still think Jimmy needs to be aggressive offensively.
All right, so with all that being said, Shaw, who's winning? Who's advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals? How many games?
Yeah, listen, a lot of people are going to pick Miami in 6, or some people in 7 here. I can't get there. I think it's going to be an uber competitive series throughout, but I'm going with Milwaukee in 6, but 6 very, very hard fought close games, with point differentials of like 2-3 points each game, just coming down to possession or the free throw battle, which I think Milwaukee's ultimately going to win just because of Giannis's ability to continuously draw fouls. But Milwaukee in 6. What about you?
Yeah, I'm going to cop out, and I'm going to say Milwaukee in 6 as well too. I mean, I could have easily leaned a little bit more to the gentleman's sweep with Milwaukee, because I just feel like these first 2 games I think are critical. I think if the Miami Heat wind up winning 1 or 2 of these the first 2 games being played, then we can see this being stretched out to 6 games, maybe even 7 games. But I just feel like the Milwaukee Bucks, this is their opportunity. They were left with a bad taste in their mouth by the Toronto Raptors when they had an opportunity to probably even get to the finals last year. And I think that, yes, they've had some bumps in the road, albeit what we've seen in this first round matchup against the Orlando Magic. I think that Budenholzer and Giannis as well too are very vocal about how they cannot afford to allow a team like the Miami Heat to catch them sleeping again. And if the Miami Heat compete against them, that's just the Miami Heat doing what the Miami Heat does, right? And so I expect this to basically to go to 6 games, but I think in the end, I think it's just too much Giannis. I think it's too much Bucks. Again, we don't give enough credit for how good the Bucks are defensively, and that all of these guys have stepped up in some way, shape, or form and have become one of the most effective teams on both sides of the basketball. I think that's something to be said, and the Miami Heat are not the ones who are going to have the final say about whether or not that all means something for them to actually get to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, no arguments here. Milwaukee is well equipped to, kind of march on. But as I said, it's going to be a hard-fought series. And if they get caught slipping, Miami will be right there to pick up the pieces and try to advance. So no easy ones here, but I think Milwaukee definitely has an advantage overall. Simply because, again, when you have the best player in the series, that usually gives you a significant leg up. But in general, Miami is going to be game, and Spoelstra's an amazing coach, and I'll be interested to see what types of schemes they utilize and create to try to make it harder for both Giannis and Chris Middleton. But I think Coach Bud has enough kind of wherewithal to adapt and maybe get some easy shots for some other guys too that can contribute.
Absolutely. Well, once again, we appreciate you guys for hopping on board with us this week as we give you our preview for the Eastern Conference semifinal matchup between the Milwaukee Bucks and the Miami Heat. Once again, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFaceLee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. And as always, we encourage you to locate the Baseline, add us to your playlist, and allow us to be your go-to resource, getting you prepped up for an exciting NBA playoffs. Once again, for the Baseline, Cal Lee Warrenshaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.